Hey friends, welcome back to Cook with Kris. I'm Kris. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm a holistic health coach and a classically trained chef. I'm a former personal chef, and I love helping people learn how to be more confident in the kitchen and just feel like cooking isn't so hard. So for the entire month of January, I am doing a confident cooking series. So last week I went all over knife skills, how to use your knife, how to choose a knife, and how to feel more confident with your knife. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about cooking methods and the different types of cooking methods and how to make your food taste really good and actually come out to the way that you intended it to. Because for a lot of people, I think we're experimenting a lot in the kitchen, and I want you guys to experiment in the kitchen. But it can be helpful to know how to get to the outcome you want, and that is through cooking methods. So knowing some cooking methods is going to determine the outcome. It's also going to help you to be more efficient in the kitchen, which I know a lot of you told me is your biggest concern. You're busy mamas or you're busy people, and you're just like, I just need to get dinner on the table, and it just feels kind of hard. And so knowing how to get from point A to point B can be really helpful, and it doesn't have to be so hard. So today I'm going to share with you how to cook in different ways to achieve the actual outcome you want. And this is also going to improve the flavor of your meals. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about flavor foundations, but sometime in December, I talked a little bit more about the 3 flavor factors, which are taste, texture, and temperature. And when you get those right, your meals just taste more delicious. And texture is really important. If you don't want to be making something that's mashed, then we don't want to be overcooking things, right? Because it's not going to have the mouthfeel that we want. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the 2 main types of cooking methods, and what we're going to do today is we're going to cook together. I'm going to make one of my most popular recipes, my Tex-Mex turkey taco pie, and I'm going to chat with you about a couple of the cooking methods that I'm using while I'm making this. I've got my notes in front of me to try and stay on track so we're not here for an entire hour, because I want these to be manageable for you guys to listen to and really get some solid information out of. So let's go ahead and let's just jump into cooking methods. What are the main cooking methods? What are the 2 main types of cooking methods, and how you can use the cooking methods to determine the outcome you want from your dish. Okay, so there's 2 main types of cooking methods. There's your moist heat cooking method, and there is your dry heat cooking method. Now, many people think moist heat cooking method and they think soft. And so they think things like sauteing and roasting are moist heat cooking methods, but they're not unless you're not doing it the right way. Any of your dry heat cooking methods, okay, dry heat cooking methods are either use no moisture or use fat as the cooking medium. So these are things like grilling and baking, okay? You're not using any sort of moisture for those. This is also things like roasting and sauteing and stir frying. Those are all considered dry heat cooking methods because you're either using a fat. And speaking of cooking, I gotta turn down my pan over here or it's gonna catch on fire. So you are either talking about something where you're using a fat as the medium, as in the case of sauteing or stir frying, and then your moist heat cooking methods, you are using some sort of a liquid. So these are things like poaching, and so that's either shallow poaching or deep poaching. And then there are I'm getting ahead of myself. So there are things like poaching and boiling and simmering and blanching. Those are all moist heat cooking methods. And what cooking method you choose is going to be determined by the actual outcome you want of the dish. But knowing what the different cooking methods are and when to use the different cooking methods is really helpful. So there is also the opportunity to combine those 2 cooking methods as well. Oftentimes we will pan sear something before putting it in the oven. Now, those are both dry heat cooking methods. However, oftentimes we will pan sear something and then add some liquid to it in the case of braising or stewing. And really the only difference between braising and stewing is braising are typically larger pieces of meat and stewing are smaller pieces of meat. There's a couple more nuances, but basically that's it. So your whole goal is to know what the different cooking methods are and know what cooking method to use to get to where you want to go. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make, let's go ahead and let's start getting some sweet potatoes ready for steaming because I'm making my sweet potato turkey taco pie, and I know that's a mouthful, but it's one of my oldest and most favorite recipes. And for this recipe, I combine a layer of seasoned, you can use turkey, you can use beef, you can use impossible meat, you can use whatever you want to for the ground meat. A combination of peppers and onions and some ground meat on the bottom layer, and seasoned with my homemade taco seasoning. This recipe is on the blog. And then I top it with a layer of deliciously steamed and mashed sweet potatoes. And then I top that with a layer of cheese and some jalapenos if kids aren't eating with you, unless your kids like spicy. So it is a really delicious, very family-friendly dinner, and I'm gonna go ahead and make that tonight. So I figured as we chat, we might as well go ahead and cook together. So I'm gonna peel some sweet potatoes. I forgot my peeler, and so I've got to use this one, which isn't so great. So don't mind my peeling, and then I'm gonna use this steamer. So I'm gonna go ahead, and in order to steam these, and most of us know what steaming is, which uses liquid, so it is a moist heat cooking method, right? I'm just gonna add a little bit of water to the bottom, just in case you don't know how to do this. A little bit of water to the bottom, steamer basket, put it in. You do not want the water, I don't know, if I turn it, you're gonna see the water, but you don't want the water to go above, okay? You don't want to actually submerge whatever you're cooking in the water when you're steaming, because that is a whole different cooking method. At that point, you're basically simmering. So you wanna make sure that the water doesn't come above the steamer basket. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this on. And we're gonna bring that to a boil while I go ahead and chop my sweet potatoes, and let's chat about how to know what cooking method to use, okay? So we talked about moist heat cooking methods, which are your steaming, your boiling, your blanching, and then there's combination methods. You've got your braising and your stewing. And those are things like, using the slow cooker is the same deal for that. Man, this peeler is not my fave. And then you've got your dry heat cooking methods, which either uses no moisture or uses a fat as a cooking medium. So those are things like roasting and sauteing and stir frying and pan searing. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make when they are figuring out what cooking methods to use is they choose a cooking method, okay, but they don't do it correctly. So there is a right and a wrong way to utilize these cooking methods. And one of the best ways to know if you're using the cooking method right is if you're getting the outcome you want. So if you are trying to saute vegetables and you want the vegetables to be a little bit kind of crispy on the outside, firm on the outside, and soft on the inside, you want a similar outcome from sauteing as you do from roasting. Roasting is just at a higher heat. And you end up with your vegetables like a little bit mushy and not at all caramelized on the outside. Or if you're trying to cook some sort of a meat in a pan, if you're trying to pan sear it and you don't end up with that Maillard reaction, which most people call caramelization, but when it comes to meat, it's called a Maillard reaction. And that's that like nice crust you get on the chicken or the beef if you're doing steak or something like that. If you're not getting that, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, it could be because you just don't have the heat up high enough, because so many people are afraid of heat. You guys are cooking. We gotta use some heat. As long as you are in the kitchen with your food and you're paying attention to it, chances are it's not up too high. And the other thing is that oftentimes we will crowd the pan, and then what we think we're doing is sauteing, and what we are actually doing is steaming. We're basically steaming in a pan. And the same thing happens when we go to roast vegetables. I was talking to my mom about this last week, actually. If you overcrowd your pan of vegetables, they will not get crispy. They will just get kind of soft. They'll cook, but they'll get kind of soft. So it's really important that we just learn these basic techniques for actually getting the results that we want out of our cooking. Also, great tools like a peeler that works is great. So those are two of the biggest mistakes I see people make. The first mistake is that they don't use the right cooking method, that they're trying to achieve something and they're not using the right cooking method. And the second one is that they're not doing it the right way. And you know what? All of this just comes with skill. There's nothing wrong if you're like, I didn't know that, because I didn't know these things either until I went to school and I learned them. These things aren't necessarily inherent, but understanding a couple things, like when you are using a moist heat cooking method, what is actually cooking your vegetables, your meat, or whatever is the actual moisture. And when you're using a dry heat cooking method, what is cooking your vegetables or your meat is either the air circulating around, as in the case of baking, right? doing anything special when you're baking something other than you might put a little bit of oil on the pan so the cake doesn't stick, you know, that is also a cooking method. You're not doing anything special to it, right? You're not tossing your cake around. The air is circulating around your cake, and that is how it's cooking it. And the same thing when you're roasting. Actually, interestingly enough, when you're roasting, you are also, roasting is just baking at high heat. When you are roasting, you are also using the air circulating around. A lot of people think that it's the fat, and you actually don't want to use too much fat when you're roasting. If you use too much fat when you're roasting, then oftentimes it gets too soft, kind of like when you overcrowd your vegetables. When you're roasting, the fat is primarily for flavor. Fat provides mouthfeel and flavor to dishes. It's one of the most important things in the culinary world, not to mention for actually making our meal satisfying. So you want to make sure that you are doing the things you need to do in order to achieve, well, your final results. And I'm just going to keep saying that over and over again. So if you want your roasted vegetables nice and crispy, don't overcrowd the pan. Don't use too much fat. Just toss it in it. Make sure you are always, we're going to talk about seasoning in a couple weeks, but you guys, we got to season as we go. Please, 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 promise me now, make me a promise, you will not season your vegetables after you cook them. Promise. You got to cook them before and during, or you got to season them before and during, okay? So you want to toss your vegetables that you are roasting in a little bit of oil, and also with, and a high heat oil, by the way, is what you're going to want to use. Otherwise, your oil is going to get rancid, and that is not going to taste good. So I like avocado oil. That's my preferred. That's just what I like. It's neutral in flavor. All right, I got my sweet potatoes, and I can hear my steamer going, so I'm going to go ahead and put those in, and then we'll talk more. So if you want your roasted vegetables crispy, then you need to do the things that you need to do in order to make your vegetables crispy. Oh, I've got another sweet potato. Whoops, I am cooking for my mom and sister tonight, so gotta have enough food for all of us. For those of you who are just hopping on, I am cooking my semi-famous Tex-Mex turkey taco pie recipe over here today. This is actually my go-to that I give to new mamas, my mama friends who have babies. I do a Tex-Mex turkey taco pie because it serves a crowd and it's super kid-friendly. I make my own homemade taco seasoning that I mentioned before, which you can change the level of spice. Like I add chili powder, but I don't even add any cayenne to it. I just add some smoked paprika that adds some smokiness to it. But I just saw a comment. Salmon, how many times a week is it good to consume it? I'll answer that in just a minute. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of these, I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of this in. I keep moving, so my camera's confused. Yes. So I lost my train of thought as I was making Tex-Mex turkey taco pie. So it's a super family-friendly recipe. So it is a layer of taco meat, and you can use whatever sort of meat you want, and topped with some sweet potatoes that I steam and then I mash. And I add a little bit of butter to it. You don't have to, but that makes it really creamy and delicious and just adds to the flavor because just like we mentioned, fat adds to flavor and to mouthfeel. Think of dishes that have no fat in them at all. They're kind of boring. So just like things like plain rice or plain steamed broccoli or plain chicken breast. They're kind of boring without any sort of fat unless you add a sauce on top. So it adds a lot of flavor and mouthfeel. I'm gonna go ahead and dice up some onions and we're gonna saute these up over here. So if you are wanting to make your vegetables or your meat crispy, you wanna make sure that you are not crowding the pan. Okay, so that's your dry heat cooking method, and you're letting the cooking method work for you, okay? That is always the goal, is, bye. My sister just left. That you wanna let the cooking method work for you because you're using that cooking method for a reason. So if you're steaming and you try to go and steam and there's no water in the bottom, well, you're gonna end up with a burnt mess. If you are trying to roast some vegetables and when you go to roast your vegetables, you have crowded the pan too much and you haven't added any fat, so they just stick to the bottom, then they're just gonna be like a steamed kind of mushy mess. So if you feel like your vegetables that you are trying to roast are always mushy, or if you feel like you never really get that beautiful caramelization on your meat, Cooking methods are primarily for meat and vegetables. That's why these cooking methods are primarily for meat or vegetables. Things like beans and greens have their own specific cooking methods. So that's why I'm specifically talking about meat and vegetables. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot, and then I'll answer some of the questions that have popped up. One of the questions that I get asked is, how do I know what cooking method to use? Well, like I've said a few times, I mean, it's really based on the outcome that you're looking for. Like, do you want something crispy? Do you want something soft? If you are going to mash something, well, then go ahead and steam it, or go ahead and you can boil it. If you want vegetables that are soft but have a little bit of bite to them, you can blanch them. And blanching is just like boiling, but it's very quickly. And you finish them in an ice bath after, so it shocks them, so they still have some crispness to them. And the same thing with meat. So what is the outcome you want from your meat? It also depends on the type of vegetables or the type of meat you're using. So what kind of outcome do you want from the meat? Ooh, the onions are getting to my eyes. These onions are slightly past their prime, so I might be a little sad over here over my onions. But so if you want your meat to be nice and crispy on the outside, then you're going to want to do something like pan sear it. If you don't pan sear it, then it's going to be next to impossible to get that sear on it if you're baking it. It might get a little bit of browning on the top, like you notice from a turkey if you are cooking the turkey at a higher heat on Thanksgiving or something like that, but it takes a long time for it to get there. If you want crispy meat, then don't slow cook it, because that's basically braising it. It also depends on the type of meat or vegetable. So the same rule goes for pretty much all types of meat and vegetables. If you want something, If something is higher in, if it's higher in muscle, if you do eat meat, if it's a part of the animal that is higher in muscle, like on a steak, the chuck roast, then it's going to do better with a longer, slower, more moist heat cooking method. I lost my connection there for a second. You could braise it, so you could sear it first. Remember, that's both a combination moist and dry heat cooking method. You could sear it first and then slow cook it, but your primary cooking method, the whole goal is to break it down. So moist, I keep losing my connection. I'm sorry, you guys. So moist heat cooking methods help to break things down. So the same thing with vegetables that are more fibrous, okay? So think of fibrous vegetables or large muscle meats. Those are way better with a moist heat cooking method like braising or like a quick boil for vegetables. So things like broccoli and cauliflower are going to be more easily cooked that way, but you can also roast them. It's gonna take a lot longer to saute broccoli or cauliflower. But again, it also depends on what you want to use them for. So general rule of thumb, if it's a more fibrous vegetable, moist heat cooking methods or higher heat cooking methods like roasting are going to be better. If it is a vegetable that is a lot more delicate and has a lot more water in it, so more water than fiber. So these are things like zucchini, things like peppers. They do better with a more dry heat cooking method. So I'm gonna saute some onions and some peppers. And once I saute those up, I'm gonna go ahead and add, I've got turkey here, but you can use any sort of meat you want, and some taco seasoning. Now, here's a really good example, you guys. I have a small hot plate over here. It's clearly not as big a space as the oven or the stove back there. So this is way too crowded to really, really saute, okay? There's no space in between the vegetables. There's really no way to let that air circulate in order to cook them. You need that air circulating in order to get that crispness. So they are gonna cook, but they're mostly gonna steam. And that's okay with me because of what I'm making. But if you want your vegetables to be sauteed and to have, like I said before, and to have that little bit of caramelization on them, you need to leave space in the pan. So it's all about the outcome you want and the type of vegetable or meat that you are using. For more delicate vegetables like asparagus, you can roast asparagus, but you need to do it for a much for a much more brief amount of time, right? You don't want to be trying to roast. You would not roast asparagus as long as you roast a potato. In the same vein, it's going to take you a lot longer to steam potatoes than it is to steam asparagus. Does that make sense? The less fiber, the quicker it's going to cook, the more delicate cooking methods you want to use, the more fiber, the more aggressive cooking methods you can use to get the results that you want. And the same thing with our meats, okay? Because we're basically talking about vegetables and meat. And maybe one day, maybe what we'll do one day, I think I'm gonna do this. I was thinking about this morning. I'm gonna come on and we are just gonna do like Veggies 101 and Meat 101. And when I say 101, like, we're gonna help you make them taste delicious. Because my whole goal is that you guys really just enjoy the food that you're cooking. And you know how to cook it and you feel confident. Like when somebody says steam something, you know what to do. When somebody says saute something, you know what to do. When somebody says roast something, you know what to do. And then you're actually getting the outcome you want. And on the flip side, if you come home with zucchini from the store and you're like, I'm thinking of steaming this zucchini. And you know that's a moist heat cooking method and that you can steam that zucchini, but what you're wanting is like really like crispy zucchini, you know, the kind that's grilled with the lines on it, but you try and steam it for that result, you're not gonna get the result you want. So knowing the different cooking methods is really just about knowing the result you want, knowing how to get there, and knowing which cooking methods are best for the different things that you're cooking. So I'm just gonna go through, so I got a couple questions. How many times a week is it good to consume salmon? That's totally up to you and what feels good in your body, honestly. Unless you're pregnant, and in which case you want to go with the American Pregnancy Association recommendations for fish. I think it's like 6 ounces a week, but please don't take my word for that because I am not a doctor or a pediatric dietitian. So it's really up to you and what feels good for your body. There's always going to be a high level for things. But you would have to eat like salmon all day long every day to reach that level. So I can't tell you I'm qualified to give you an exact amount, but do what feels good for you and your body, and variety is important. So salmon's great. You want to have it a couple times a week, according to the general nutrition recommendations, that is great. But variety is important too, right? So that's my answer to that question. So we have any other cooking questions? Okay. All right, you guys, hit me up with your cooking questions. Let me know what your questions are about cooking methods, where you struggle with learning how to cook. I've got my vegetables sauteing here. Like I said, this pan is pretty full, so you can notice there's some slight caramelization on these vegetables, but nothing crazy. I'm gonna go ahead and that's because they're a little bit crowded. I'm gonna go ahead and look at my sweet potatoes, see how they're doing. You know, I mean, I just touched with my hand, which I really don't even feel the tips of my fingers anymore after so many years of working in kitchens. But typically you would use a fork if your sweet potatoes or whatever you're steaming are fork tender. That means they're done. You want some bite to your vegetables. Unless you're mashing them, just like I said, you want to season before and season as you go. Make sure your vegetables have some bite because texture is important. Okay, these are done, and you can tell because they're fork tender, okay? You can take a fork and you can slice it easily, then they're done. Please don't overcook your vegetables. You want your vegetables to have some texture. There are foods like those big muscle meats I mentioned, like your brisket or your chuck roast, right? That you are going to want to cook low and slow in a moist heat cooking method in order to break them down. But most vegetables, okay, they're not muscles, and they don't need, even though there is the fiber that does need to start to slightly, not break down, but that does need to soften, right? And you do want that to happen. It's still not going to take as much time. Okay, we're all sauteed over here. We're going to turn it down. It's not going to take as much time as things like meat. So just be conscious about what you're cooking and that outcome you want to get. So I'm going to go ahead and add my turkey over here. But again, you can use whatever meat you want. You've got to wipe and sanitize because food safety. Yes. And I've got ground meat over here. We're not doing anything fancy. But this is key, okay? This is not today's topic of cooking methods. It's more along the lines of seasoning, which we're going to talk about in 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to talk about the foundations of flavor. But I do, just like with vegetables, want you to know that one of the best things you can do to become a better cook is to learn how to season correctly. So that means seasoning ahead of time. So with vegetables, it takes time for that salt to infuse with inside the vegetables. So you want to season ahead of time. And with meat, you want those flavors to melt. You want, if you're using any dried herbs especially, you want them to break down. You want those aromatic compounds to release. You want the food to be infused with flavor, and it needs time to do that. So I'm adding a bunch of my homemade taco seasoning to it. I'm going to try and film a video soon with my homemade taco seasoning. I think I did one. I think there's one in IGTV with my taco seasoning, because I got asked about it again the other day. But this is a really delicious, family-friendly recipe we've got going on over here. So as that sautés, I know it's getting a little loud. I'm not going to go ahead and mash the sweet potatoes because I use the food processor, and that's going to be loud. But I want to give you guys a couple bullet points from what I talked about today, so you guys can go home and learn more about the different cooking methods and come back and shoot me a DM if you have any questions about cooking methods, about learning how to cook. Let me know what your questions are about flavor. We're going to talk about that next week. So main points, okay? Knowing the different cooking methods is important, but what's more important is knowing the outcome you want from what you're cooking, okay? Do you want it crispy? Do you want it soft? Whether we're talking about meat or vegetables or whatever it is, what is the outcome you want? Knowing the cooking methods, the moist heat cooking methods, so your steaming, your boiling, your blanching, your poaching, or your dry heat cooking methods, so that's something with a fat, so that is like roasting or sauteing or stir frying, or without, like baking and grilling. And then there's your combinations, your braising and stewing. So knowing, okay, this is the outcome I want, and this is what is going to get me there, okay? Also remembering things like season ahead of time, okay? So if you really want, and we'll talk more about this, but if you really want your meals infused with flavor, you gotta season ahead of time. Make sure you're not overcrowding your pan, because then what is gonna happen is those waters from the vegetables are going to release, and you're gonna switch from your dry heat cooking method to your moist heat cooking method, and that's not gonna help you get the outcome you want. So whether you're sauteing or you're roasting, make sure you're giving your vegetables space. Make sure you are allowing your cooking method to work for you. So if you're gonna roast something, give it space for the air to circulate. If you're gonna saute something, make sure that when you put the things in the pan, you are stirring them immediately, so you're coating them in the fat, because that is helping to cook it, right? Because that fat is the cooking medium there. If you are going to be boiling something, make sure the water is up to the top and none of that ingredient is exposed. If you are steaming, make sure that the steam is just below the steamer basket and it's not going above, and you're not then boiling it, because then there will be extra water and that's going to change the consistency of your vegetables. So the cooking method matters, and it will help you to get the outcome you want, and it will help to improve the flavor of your food and also your efficiency in the kitchen, because you're actually going to get to the outcome faster. I think I started saying that earlier and I went off on a tangent. as is typical over here. But I'm gonna finish cooking up this Tex-Mex turkey taco pie for my family's dinner tonight. The recipe is on my blog. I can actually put a link in my bio if you guys want that recipe. I can do that. But I love this recipe. I hope you guys will go home and try it. I'm not obviously finishing the recipe with you guys today because it'll take me another 10 minutes or so. And that's all I wanted to share with you guys about cooking methods. But I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. I appreciate you guys all being here. Next week, we're going to talk about the foundations of flavor and help you to continue to be a more confident cook, to enjoy cooking, and to create some really delicious meals that are delicious and nourishing and flavorful and satisfying. All right, friends, have a beautiful Thursday, and I'll see you guys next week.